Good morning, everybody. My name is Bryn Lopez. I am the manager of Children's Book World in Los Angeles, where we celebrate diversity, knowledge, and enrichment. It's a world where every child sees themselves on our bookshelves. And I'm so very excited because today we are speaking with nonfiction author and historian Susan Goldman Rubin to talk about her newest book, The Women Who Built Hollywood, 12 Trailblazers in Front of and Behind the Camera. This book talk can be used in your classrooms to foster discussion about film history and the role of women in impacting its legacy. Susan Goldman Rubin grew up in the Bronx. She dreamed of becoming an artist. She illustrated her first three picture books, but then turned to writing nonfiction, mainly about art. I love your books about art.
Thank you.
And history, and is the author of more than 55 books for young people. And her titles include books about Diego Rivera, Leonard Bernstein, the Wyeth family, Freedom Summer, and now this new book about Hollywood, which impacts and has affected everybody because it's a medium that everybody sees. Welcome, Susan. How are you this morning?
Hello. I'm fine because today is the birthday of my book. Today is the official, what we call pub date. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Bren, for inviting me to talk about the book with you. When I was a girl, and still, I love movies. And I wanted to be not only an artist, but a movie star on the side. And during the pandemic, just a couple of years ago, I was talking to my editor, and I always had the idea that I wanted to do a book about the early film stars of silent films, because they were my size. You can't see me, but I'm 5 feet tall, and I had very curly hair, as you can see from that other photo. And I always wanted to do a book because Mary Pickford, for example, the marvelous actress, businesswoman, was so little like me that she was able to play child roles into her adulthood. And they're wonderful films. And I thought, oh, wouldn't that be a good book? And my editor said, yeah, I think it'd be a great book, but wait a minute, why don't we expand it and talk about other branches of the film industry? And that led me on the most wonderful research path.
Yeah, I mean, I am always desperate for books like this because I think that we do have so many wonderful biographies about people within the world of music and people within the world of art. But film has really not had the same sort of depth of books, whether they be picture books or middle grade or nonfiction. There really have not been that depth of books on the subject of film, but film is really the art form of the 20th century going into the 21st century.
That's right. Lillian Gish, one of the actresses I wrote about, said this is America's art form. And it was very important to her to preserve these films. In fact, when I was a girl living in New York, my brother took me to the Museum of Modern Art, and I couldn't believe that I would see a movie there. So do museums save movies? It was wonderful. And in fact, they do. These films have been preserved.
They sure do. So I'm going to bring this down. We're going to look at some pictures from the book, as well as some video clips of the people. And we'll go ahead and have a conversation about these amazing, amazing women. But we have to always start at the beginning.
Thank you.
Let me just focus this up to the front. There we go. And the beginning begins with one particular woman. And you want to talk about her?
Yes, this is Mary Pickford, who not only was this really the first film star starting in the more than 100 years ago. And there you see her playing the role of a little girl. And she was actually 25 years old. And what was so curious was that they would make furniture oversized so that it would look like she was a little girl with her feet dangling at the edge of a couch. But not only was she a film star, but she became an executive and founded her own film company. And yet she came from a very poor family, a single parent family, and had to start acting on the stage to help support her family. So her story is amazing. On the right is she's in a film, very tense moment, Tess of the Country. I think it's called Tess of the Country, and Tess of the Storm Country. And she started working with the director named D.W. Griffith, who taught her how to show feeling for the film. Remember, no words. There were just title cards here and there, like a picture book, giving a few words. And these actors and actresses had to show their feelings and what was happening through their emotions, their body motions and expressions. And this amazed me. At the beginning, when Mary Pickford was starting, she didn't want to be in the movie. She thought that made her a lowlife, meant that she was a failure. Stage actors thought very little of movies. That's how women really got involved, because it wasn't a big money-making business. Men thought, oh, this is a fad. It's going to come and go. It's just for immigrants who come over and can't understand the language, and they can see these moving pictures like my grandmother. But in fact, it turned out, as you know, because of the women, by the 1920s to be a very big business, and then men took over. So when Mary Pickford went to do her first film, she thought it was just beneath her. Here she is. She had just married Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Douglas Fairbanks, who's doing this handstand. And they were on the rooftop of a New York building. You can see how little she is and the kind of camera they used then for making movies. And they were just kind of fooling around, having fun. They had just gotten married and they were about to go on their honeymoon. And I thought this was a marvelous picture to show the spirit of fun they had on screen and off screen. They became the leading producers in Hollywood.
And these were two huge stars at the time separately. So when they came together, it must have been monumental, because he was like the action hero, starring in all of the action films and doing all of the big stunts. And here she is, the leading lady, who's always playing the romantic leading lady. And here they get married. What an impact that must have made.
Well, they were considered royalty, Hollywood royalty. And their home, called Pickfair, Pick and Fair for Fairbanks, became just a palatial estate. Everybody wanted to go there and visit. Now here you see them forming United Artists. There is a Douglas Fairbanks on the left, Mary Pickford next to him, Charlie Chaplin, who was a great comic film star, and the director, D.W. Griffith. And together they formed United Artists. And I hadn't realized that. So here was Mary Pickford starting to act in movies as a teenager, and she found one of the biggest movie companies in Hollywood. Incredible.
Yeah.
And she wrote her own contract. She was a whiz, a very sharp businesswoman.
And the first woman to run a studio like that, with the four of them, but they were the presidents of the studio, right?
Yes, they were. And they did, each one of them had their own lots for making films, but then they would distribute the movies. They said, why should we be sharing our money with other companies like MGM, who later bought them? But let's do it ourselves and earn. So they were very sharp business people, as well as fabulous entertainers.
And what an impact that made for so many people. We have things like the writer's strike and things like that going on now, but so many of these people must be thankful for these original people who were artists, creative artists, who took control over their own lives, because they felt they weren't getting the attention from the producers that they deserved, and really impacted everybody for the future.
And the income. By the way, Fairbanks and Mary Pickford founded the film school at USC. I mean, they were very generous. They really thought of film as an art form and wanted to develop it. And they were part of the founders of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.
Well, let's see a wonderful clip of Mary Pickford showcasing her at her most romantic leading lady. You can see what a wonderful young actress she was. About how old do you think she was there?
I think she was just about 18, 19.
Wow.
You know, she had never dated or kissed a man. And in one of the early love scenes, and this may be one of them, D.W. Griffith wanted her to kiss, and she said, "No, I will not do that." And he teased her and called her the Great Unkissed. So she was just a very young girl, probably about 17, 18 years old.
You know, we watch movies today with young teenage leads where it's about love and romance, but you see 100 years ago, beyond 100 years ago,
yes,
he's making this movie that has the same feel for it. And you see what a dynamic performer she is. You're drawn to her face and the expressions that she makes.
You know, it's so charming. And Bryn, you made a wonderful point that these movies can be seen by all of us, given the internet.
That is correct. There are so many wonderful silent movies on YouTube and other video places where you can see these really special films. Let's go to our next picture. We have her there with the camera, and then she's sitting next to another amazing woman.
Oh, this other amazing woman, Frances Marion, was the first major screenwriter in Hollywood. Her career lasted for years into talkies. She was marvelous. And in fact, the woman who wrote the book, Carrie Beauchamp, is a scholar, a film scholar, and she wrote a book called Without Lying Down and Power of Women in Hollywood. And it was her book that was on my shelf that inspired me to start looking into doing a book about these women I had not known about, who really developed film. Frances Marion was considered the major adapter of books for the screen. And she thought of so many movies to do with Mary Pickford, children's books, you know, A Little Princess. She was great at taking the story and adapting it for the screen. She had started as an artist. I really related to her. And she knew how to visually tell the story. And
yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to ask about I know that as you mentioned, the children's book stories that they made, you know, Shirley Temple was known for that later in the 30s, but here we have Mary Pickford doing it in silence with A Little Princess. Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, I know, was a really big picture of theirs.
And Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, when Mary Pickford did those films, she was a married woman. She was in her 20s. And Frances Marion, the two of them became very great friends. They were both so smart, you know, and so ambitious. And they would add bits of humor. And sometimes the producers would, really object, but that they would say, this is how we want it done. And they had that power. It was terrific.
And how important it was to have someone like Frances Marion, because when you were seeing these pictures, women were seeing stories that were coming through the eyes of the female characters and written through the gaze of the female screenwriter. And that makes a big difference.
Huge. Frances Marion was just known as the great adapter of books to the screen. You know, think about how many stories from books are shown nowadays. She was the first. She wrote the very first textbook on how to write for the screen.
Wow, that's so interesting. Okay, let's see our next big star. And our next big star started with her sister. We have her with her sister here. Tell us about these two ladies.
Well, these two, Lillian Gish is in the foreground and her sister Dorothy is in the background. They were friends of Mary Pickford. You know, as I was thinking about the book, so many of the women in the story are interconnected, so many episodes. And Mary Pickford had been their friend. And she said, and they were, Lillian Gish was a stage actress as well. She said, here, I think you could earn some extra money. Go over to D.W. Griffith's studio. So this is the very first film they made. And they were supposed to be terrified because they're being held up in some awful situation. And I loved getting this picture with the gun coming through the wall. And Griffith said, no, look terrified. And Lillian Gish said, we were scared to death. He thought they didn't look terrified enough. So he ran around the studio shooting a gun into the ceiling. And they nearly fainted. And then he said, perfect. That's the look I wanted. And that was Lillian Gish's first film with him, and she became a great, great star. And her sister, Dorothy, became a comedian. So this was all through Women Helping Women, a tip from, and when at first, they were wearing different bows in their hair. One was wearing a red bow, one was wearing a blue bow. So he just called them, red, you do this, blue, you do this. And when Mary Pickford heard about it, she was very incensed. And she said, they are ladies of the theater. You must call them Miss Lillian Gish and Miss Dorothy Gish. And he always did.
Here again, we see how wonderful she was at being in a distressed crisis situation. She was a very good dramatic actress.
She also gave so much for the film. He insisted on filming this particular film in a blizzard. And they went through the scene, I think about 20, 30 times, it's in the book, before he felt they got it right. She came down with a fever, and she had to be running through the snow and land on an ice floe. And I don't know if you can see her fingers dangling in the water, but she got frostbite. And she later said, in those days, we would do anything to make the film right. What dedication. No divas here.
And her film career spanned almost a century. I mean, she worked until she was in her late 80s, I think. And her last film, I think, was almost like 87 or 88, I think, 1980s, 1987, 1988.
Yeah, she kept winning honorary awards, and she was dedicated to the theater, but also to film and then TV. So she really went through every phase of entertainment.
Wow.
But she always credited Griffith for developing film as an art form and what they learned. She said she always learned more from him than from anybody else.
Well, let's watch a wonderful clip of Lillian Gish and her. This is a very intense little scene. It's from a movie called Broken Blossoms with Donald Crisp, who was another great actor who started in silence and went on to a long film career playing. This is her father, who is terrorizing her. Well, let's watch. What do you think of that, Susan?
Oh, I started tearing up. I was so worried about her. She expressed such feeling, and that torn sleeve, and without the sound, we didn't have to hear it. We felt it. Griffith said, make the audience feel it. I sure did. I got shivers. Oh, God.
I bet audiences were right there with her. And it's such a dramatic thing. And you can even see just through her eye movements and others that clearly she's perhaps praying up to God to help her or somebody to help her with her eyes, the way she moves them. And she starts out with trying to figure out solutions, but at the end, you can see the sheer terror as she's screaming. You can feel the screams that she's making with no noise.
And help does come, I think, in the form of a Chinese American poet.
That's right. That's right. There's a whole other level of this particular story, right? That was Setsu Hayakawa. No, what was Setsu Hayakawa? Or
I have to look it up, but
I think that was the actor
who rescues her.
Leading man. Oh, let me go 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and stop that and move on. There we go. Now we're moving on from the time of silence to the beginning of sound films, and a great African-American actress, a great actress, Louise Beavers.
She was not known to me. I was amazed to find her. I wanted diversity in this book because so many people contributed to film, so many, many, many. And Louise Beavers, my goodness, she was one of the very first Black actresses on screen. She started in silence and grew up in Pasadena, and she was marvelous. And the picture on the right is the first talkie that Mary Pickford did. That's Mary Pickford sitting in her lap, and the movie was called Coquette. And actually, Mary Pickford was older than Louise Beavers, and Louise Beavers is supposed to have been her nursemaid, and you can see she's comforting her. But Louise Beavers expressed this lovely warmth, and that enabled her to get so many roles. She was in over 200 movies, and I hadn't even known that.
It's always interesting to me to see what actresses like Louise Beavers, and who we'll speak about Hattie McDaniel in a moment as well, but what these actresses did with roles that they were typecast in, because if you were a Black actor so frequently, your only role opportunities frequently would be servants or someone like that, and or maids, or and within that box that they were forced into, they would create so much story behind the lines, and story behind their eyes, and their what you saw on screen.
And these were elegant women, very proud women, who said, I can play a maid on screen, but in my own house, this is who I am. There are some wonderful quotes in the book. They're marvelous, because they were not only actresses, it turned out that they were activists here in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
This amazed me. They were earning a lot of money. Oh, talk about this. This is Imitation of Life. This was one of the first movies where a Black woman got as big a part, as important a part as the white actress. And this is Louise Beavers on the left, playing the mother of Freddie Washington. That's Fredi, who I knew about because she co-starred with Paul Robeson, who I wrote about in another movie. And she was very light-skinned. And one of the terrible things that happened was that she seemed too light-skinned in movies with Robeson. They had to darken her skin, which was scandalous, terrible. In this movie, it's about trying to pass for white. And you see the scene on the right, her mother, Louise Beavers, they were just almost the same age, which is always curious. But they liked Louise Beavers, by the way, to stay overweight because they thought that made her look more maternal and more fitting the stereotype they had in mind. And actually, Freddie Washington was incensed by the kind of roles, stereotypical roles. And she later went on to work with the NAACP in New York. She said, when interviewed about this movie, she said, I would never think of passing. She said, that's a characterization written by a white screenwriter. And I just took the part because it was a good part. So terribly interesting. And she was very demanding about being paid properly for her role. This is Claudette Colbert, who played the other woman. It's very interesting, the story that Claudette Colbert has a pancake recipe, and Delilah, played by Louise Beavers, comes to her house to just get work to raise her daughter. They're both single mothers, and it winds up they become huge businesswomen with a kind of Aunt Jemima kind of pancake mix. It's a great movie to see.
So we're going to see a clip that showcases the dramatic work of Louise Beavers and Freddie Washington as mother and daughter. And in this clip, we see Freddie Washington beg her mother to no longer acknowledge her, even if she sees her on the street, to not acknowledge her as her daughter, that they have to live separate lives, and the devastating effect that has on her mother. And I think it is one of the greatest showcases of acting of two women in film, let alone the 1930s. And I bet Claudette Colbert was just as amazed being able to sit and watch the performance. So let's watch.
Oh, that's all right. Come, baby, and sit down. It don't feel like you're really here standing so far off.
Mother, I've done everything you wanted me to. I went to that school and tried to be happy there to please you. But I just couldn't bear it. I couldn't. I had to get away.
I understand, baby. We're going to forget all about it now. It's all right.
But it isn't all right, Mother. I want to talk to you.
I'll go upstairs, Delilah.
No, Miss B. You stay, please. I want you to hear, too.
What's my little baby got on her mind?
I want to go away.
Go away? Go where, Viola?
By that I mean, I want to go away. And you mustn't see me, or own me, or claim me, or anything. Even if you pass me on the street, you'll have to pass me by.
Oh, no, Viola.
Oh, I know it's terrible of me, Miss B. But you don't know what it is to look white and be black. You don't know. I can't go on this way any longer.
I can't give up my baby. I bore you. I nursed you. I love you. I love you more than you can guess. You can't ask your mammy to do this.
You've got to promise me, Mother.
I'm your mammy, child. I ain't no white mother. It's too much to ask of me. I ain't got the spiritual strength to meet it. I can't hang on no cross. I ain't got the strength. You can't ask me to unborn my own child.
I'm sorry, Mother. I know it's asking a lot. But I've got to live my own life. Bye.
Wow.
Wow. I'm cheering up. You know, it's so moving. And another important point is that a movie like this at the time and now raises critical discussion about racism in movies. And that, I think, it's a very important film on many levels, but the acting is phenomenal.
It really is, just to see the two of them. It's so connected to each other. And the layers of it all, especially at the end when Louise Beavers really just becomes desperate to, connect with her daughter in any way that she can. It's just heartbreaking. And there's so many other scenes that happen, but this is their one big scene together where they really get to have that.
I just want viewers to know, I'll do the spoiler, that at the end, Piola realizes how selfish and foolish she's been. And she really appreciates her mother and runs to her mother's casket, asking forgiveness.
Yeah. And what a powerful story that must have been to audiences
Yes.
in the 1930s as well. So, and here we see her playing a different kind of role because this was within a different kind of aspect of the film industry, right?
Right. This was a movie called A Race Movie. Oscar Menu was the one who started these movies showing Black actors having important jobs, nicely dressed, not in these stereotypical roles. And here, Louise Beavers is the matron of a reform school for boys. And you can see what a good job she's done. They're attentive and smiling. And just recently, this film was restored. I belong to the Academy Museum here in Los Angeles, and we'll have to talk about Louise Beavers as a Los Angeles activist.
Mm-hmm.
But this film was recently highlighted because the film had been found, as I say, and restored. And these films were terribly important and usually intended for just a Black audience. But you can see now they're historical documents. They're marvelous pieces of film history.
Absolutely. And the Academy Museum is a place that is very accessible for all people, but young people in particular. They have some wonderful exhibits and it's well worth checking out. And one more thing about this is growing up, I knew many of the, there were popular series, the Bowery Boys, the East Side Kids, and many, especially from Warner Brothers, many films about boys during the Depression who were in reform schools and other places. So now seeing this is a real discovery, because to see that there was a like-minded film that featured, Black and Black American characters is really phenomenal. So,
and
how special.
You can see the good spirit there. I mean, she's not like some principals who I remember in my school career. She's friendly and warm, and the kids really like her. You can just tell that. You can feel it.
And now we see her and a portrait of her next to another star actress of the 1930s, and probably like she was a real pioneer in breaking through one of the most important aspects of the film industry.
Yeah, this is Hattie McDaniel, and they were friends and also competing for the same roles. Hattie McDaniel wanted to be an imitation of life, and Louise Beavers wanted that very famous role that Hattie McDaniel won, that we'll talk about in a minute. I know you have some good pictures of it. But Hattie McDaniel was marvelous. Oh, I love this picture you found I found it. I do the photo research for my books, and it's exciting to find images that may not have been seen before. When she was just a teenager, she loved to sing. In fact, she sang so much that her mother, who was very poor, said, "I'll pay you a dime just to hush up," and she wouldn't. But there she won a contest by singing a song called Convict Joe about alcoholism, and she won a prize, and that was the start of her career. As a singer, entertainer, she was marvelous. She was actually a singer and performed in vaudeville before she came to the screen. And the picture on the right, of course, shows her the first Black woman, the first Black person to win an Oscar. And this was for her role in Gone with the Wind. And it was a stereotypical role. She was Mammy, but she went at it in the most intelligent way, wanting that role. It was a very important role. She had read the book by Margaret Mitchell, and she went to the screen test dressed in the part. And she had worked on developing a Georgia accent. She was a California girl, but she went with this Georgia accent, and she was so stupendous. And she had developed this kind of bossy, sassy mannerism when she did vaudeville. And she brought that to her roles, always in films. And she used that in Mammy for Gone with the Wind. And after that audition, she landed it. And the director canceled all other auditions. It was her role.
Yeah. If you've ever seen this film with an audience, particularly a large audience, but and had the experience of watching people respond and react to Hattie McDaniel in both the more light comedic aspects of it, but also the incredibly dramatic moments that she has with some of the leading stars of the time. Vivien Leigh obviously was a life force in this film as well, but they have such great scenes together. And then her scene with Clark Gable, which I think is really a couple of different scenes with Clark Gable, which is really absolutely magnificent acting work with both of them.
You know, Clark Gable had performed with Hattie McDaniel in another film, and he recommended her for the part. He kept saying she'll be great. So he was a friend. Yeah.
There was something else also do you know about the premiere of Gone with the Wind in Atlanta?
Oh, what a story. What a story.
Yeah.
Are you going to show it and tell it?
I don't have, but I was going to, if you wanted to tell briefly what happened with that.
Well, she was nominated she was thrilled, beyond thrilled, to be nominated for an Oscar. And at that time, the Best Supporting Actors and Actresses received a plaque, not a statuette. The statuettes, I noted that in my book, started being handed out in 1943. So this was just before that. But she was nominated as Best Supporting Actress for her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind, which, again, is a controversial movie, and I bring that to attention in the book because it was worthy of discussion. But she went to the Oscars and they seated her, not with her co-cast members, but way in the back of the auditorium right here in Los Angeles at the hotel downtown. And rather than sitting with the other people who had made the film, Vivian Leigh, Clark Gable, they put her back near the kitchen because it was a segregated hotel, which is horrific. And here she is getting her award. And she wore white gardenias and a sapphire blue dress. You take it from there, Bren.
Well, let's play the video and we can hear another. Well, the actress who's going to talk about this is Whoopi Goldberg. And what's the importance of Whoopi Goldberg in relation to Hattie McDaniel?
Whoopi Goldberg was the next Black woman to win an Oscar for Best Supporting in 1991 for her role in Ghost. And you'll have to forgive me because that was the one omission I made in the book, because I thought Halle Berry was the next Black actress to win. So this was pointed out to me, and we as nonfiction writers are super careful. The correction has already been made in the ebook, and in the next edition of my book, there will be the Whoopi Goldberg Award.
And that was 50 years later, but let's hear Whoopi Goldberg talk about Hattie McDaniel and hear Hattie McDaniel's actual speech.
Listen, Hattie McDaniel, man, she was the first. Think about that. That's wild. You know, she almost didn't get even invited. They put her way in the corner. Way in the corner in the back. And then she won.
Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science, fellow members of the motion picture industry, and honored guests. This is one of the happiest moments of my life. And I want to thank each one of you who had a part in selecting me for one of the awards. I sincerely hope I shall always be a credit to my race and to the motion picture industry. My heart is too full to tell you just how I feel. And may I say thank you, and God bless you.
She was the first, and Sydney was the second.
The winner is Sydney Poitier.
It's a lot of white people in between. You know what I mean? It's a long time.
Wow.
Marvelous. Marvelous.
Now, you talked about her being an activist, but also a pioneer. This picture of her at the radio is because she had succeeded in film with her Oscar, but then she went on to succeed and be a pioneer within the world of radio and then television.
Right. She created the role of Beulah. I remember listening to it when I was a kid because I loved radio. This was before we had television, and television was there, but we didn't have it yet at our house. And she was marvelous in this role and then continued the role when the show went to a television performance. What is really interesting also is that she lived in Los Angeles. Her house is still there. It's down near USC. And it was called the Sugar Hill area, where all the Black entertainers lived. Louise Beavers was her friend, and she had a mansion in that same neighborhood. And all of a sudden, the white people said, oh, they shouldn't be here. There was a deed that had been drawn up, and they fought this case and won their case in the Superior Court of Los Angeles. It was marvelous. So they were activists. It was the beginning of a real fight about discrimination in neighborhoods and housing.
Yeah, she led that fight. And look at this. I love this, love this picture of her with all of these young African-American, Black American women behind her walking in the path that she is leading.
Oh, she was a leader in so many ways. Just marvelous, marvelous.
And this next picture we see is what you were talking about, her friendship again with Louise Beavers. There they are together.
And they hosted many parties. Louise Beavers' house had once been the home of a Los Angeles mayor. So it was a very lovely, elegant neighborhood. I think one of the gentlemen there is an NAACP lawyer who worked with them on this case. and they were the plaintiffs in this case, the Sugar Hill case. And the West Adams Historical Association still exists, and there's wonderful history attached to these women, in addition to their work with film, or maybe because of their work in film, they had the power. They had the power to be seen and heard.
Wow. Now we're going to go to another amazing pioneer. We're going back to silence with this. This is Marion Wong.
I was so excited to discover Marion Wong. She was the first Chinese American filmmaker. She built her own studio in Oakland. She wrote a film, casting it entirely with Chinese Americans. It was her sister-in-law, Violet. You see the two. This is a great story, and I shouldn't talk away the book, but she was third generation American, and yet her parents followed tradition and took her to Hong Kong with her brother, thinking they would marry these children off to Chinese people. And her brother married a woman named Violet, but Marion Wong refused to get married, and her mother honored her in that, which was wonderful. So she came home and really wanted to make movies. Extraordinary. This is over 100 years ago. And not only did she star her sister-in-law, Violet, but they were both teenagers. They were 16, and they became best friends. So that's a picture of them dancing in, they dressed up in these beautiful Chinese robes and pretended they were princesses. They were full of mischief. Now, the movie, this is marvelous. It's a great story of how this was preserved. This is part of a clip from the original movie. And this is Violet, you can see on the left with the long hair. And this is Marion Wong's mother seated. The people in the film were mostly family. The young bridegroom on the right was a family friend. And the film, Marion Wong thought it was a failure. Family members backed the film, and it was shown, and it was excellent. And at the time, her dad, Marion Wong's father, had a restaurant in Oakland, and Charlie Chaplin, here he comes again, was a frequent guest having dinner there. He often would shoot movies in the Oakland area. And it is said that she used one of his cameramen to help her do the movie. And finally, she and her mother went to New York to get distribution for the film, and they couldn't. The anti-Chinese racism then was so terrible. You know, it opened my eyes and gave me a chance to discuss that issue as well. And they couldn't release the film for that reason, because it was all Chinese American. And this was really a film about a young, modern couple bucking traditions of Chinese values in their new country, in their new home in America. And so Marion Wong thought it was a failure. She never wanted to hear about it again. But fast forward, years later, her sister-in-law, Violet, was a grandmother. And her grandson, Gregory Yi Mark, who I spoke to on the phone, was at Sacramento in Asian Studies. And she, when he was still a college student, said, "Oh, Greg, here are some old films. Do something with them." And he was flabbergasted. He had them converted to 16 millimeter. He said, "That was my whole family in the film." His grandmother starring, his great aunt Marion, and even his own mother was the baby in the film. Mm-hmm. So he preserved the film and brought it to the attention of the public. It's a very powerful story. So what Marion thought was a failure was not. And this is another clip from the film where her relative says, "You can't wear your hair like that. It's got to be for a traditional wedding in a different Chinese style." And she's pulling back the bangs that were popular at that time. It's a great story. And it was Arthur Dong who did a wonderful book called Hollywood Chinese and a documentary that helped me find the film and these people.
And this film from 1916 by Marion E. Wong was called The Curse of Quan Guan, When the Far East Mingles with the West. the full film is available to look at on YouTube, and we're just going to watch a few seconds
No,
of it.
it's not the full film. Remember, because
Oh,
some
not
of
the
it
full film. I'm
was.
sorry, but the full available. What is available?
Yeah,
I apologize about that.
What Gregory found and preserved, and now the Library of Congress preserved it. It's
Yes.
a very important film.
And I'm going to cut to. I want to talk about those effects, the fading effects that were happening. The fading effects that were happening within the film were really. This is 1915 or 1916. She is a pioneer.
Oh, marvelous filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
Wrote the script and directed it, and she may have even had help from Charlie Chaplin, cinematographer, as I mentioned.
And here we have one of the great actresses in silence and sound films of the 1920s and 30s, and that is Anna May Wong.
And she was considered the first Chinese American film star. She was gorgeous, really stunning, quite tall, 5'7". She was a model as a teenager. She modeled fur coats and was in ads. Beautiful. There she is posing, as an adult, but in the image on the right, she was just 17 years old. She grew up in Chinatown. I mean, right here in Los Angeles. And when films were being shot in Chinatown, right on the street, she was so fascinated, she would run up and ask a lot of questions, and they nicknamed her Chinese Curious Child because CCC, because she was always bugging the cameraman. She started when she was just a kid, and her parents were just horrified. There was no role model. There wasn't a single one to be a Chinese American girl to be in a movie. And in this one on the right, she's in a movie called Toll of the Sea that was written by Francis Marion. And it was all these interconnections are great. Mm-hmm. And it was based on the opera by Puccini called Madame Butterfly. And it's essentially the same story. So she's sitting there probably right down the street in Malibu.
And she's a teenager here.
At 17 years old. It's beautiful. Oh, and that film on the left, she was in, again, stereotypical roles with Lon Chaney, who was actually her friend. And always these movies, just as the Black women and men were facing the same problem with stereotypes, so were the Chinese Americans. But she fought it as best she could, yet she wanted to be in movies. And kept hoping to get good roles. So I thought that would be a funny picture to show in this. But there she is on the right in a very quiet moment. She actually went back to China. She wanted to see where her father had come from. He had come here during the gold rush. And Anna May Wong's mother was his second wife, not his first wife. And that was the way things were done in those days.
Wow.
It's a whole story. But she was so taken with the Chinese culture that she started wearing these beautiful antique Chinese gowns and clothes, even though she had been a fashion model.
Now, this is a clip from the film, The Toll of the Sea. And what was special about this film?
First Technicolor movie. So it was very important on many levels. And again, remember, she's 17 years old and playing the part of this young woman who falls in love with a white man, and they have a child, but he goes back to America.
Oh, Susan?
Yes?
Oh, there we go. I can hear you. I'm sorry. For a second, I could not hear you.
I had to confirm.
Okay, let's watch this clip.
That's all.
Oh, that that brought tears to my eyes.
Oops, 1 second. I'm going to move it. There we go. And here we have another special thing.
Just as we were about to send the book to the printer, the U.S. Mint issued quarters featuring certain women, and they featured the face of Anna May Wong on the quarter. And I thought, oh, this is such a beautiful tribute. We have to have a picture of the quarter in the book. And luckily, we were able to fit it in just in time. So I'm going to be looking for those quarters.
Wow. It's amazing. These women were doing this a full 100 years ago from today, just doing these remarkable achievements. And watching that film of Anna May Wong, you see how incredibly beautiful, but how powerful she was even as a young person, as an actress. She commanded the screen like a true star.
She was a teenager then, and the emotion she feels for the little boy who's supposed to be the child she had with her white lover, American lover. She's so tender, and she's just a young girl herself. Just beautiful. And then where she's crying, she sees him, the lover, with his wife, American wife, and you can just see her broken heart. You just feel it. These actresses she was amazing, just amazing.
And that film that was based off of the opera Madame Butterfly, as you said, for audiences, Madame Butterfly was almost always played by a white female singer or actress in that role. And so for audiences to see one of the first film versions of that going to the public, and to see it actually played by a young Chinese American woman who should be playing the part authentically, must have been powerful as well. Now here's a great director.
Dorothy Arzner. I was so thrilled to discover her. Actually, my son-in-law had been working at UCLA as a librarian and helped the biographer of Dorothy Arzner do her research. So I did know a little about her, but it's a phenomenal story. Her dad also had a restaurant in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, and she became acquainted with the Hollywood people early on, but she didn't use those contacts to get started. She wanted to direct movies, and she became as powerful as the men directors, Cecil B. DeMille, D.W. Griffith, and her parents could support her, so she could afford to pick and choose movies. But she did start at the beginning. She realized that she wanted to be a director, and she went to the studio and said, how do I do this? And they said, you've got to start at the bottom. And she did, typing scripts, and learned all about movie making. These were the early days of movie making. And this was during World War I. And she went on bit by bit learning her craft and wanting to direct her own movie. And at one point, she was working with one studio. I'd have to check my notes. I think it was Paramount. And they said, look, we'll give you a not so good movie to direct just to learn how to do it. And she said, no, if I can't get a first-rate movie, then I will go to another studio. And she held it fast, and she gave them 2 weeks. And these women were very strong. And she said, I'll give you 2 weeks. Take it or leave it. And they didn't want to lose her because she obviously was so gifted, because she had done some remarkable things learning how to edit. These women learned how to do everything about making films, cutting, editing, things I knew nothing about. So I learned as I went along. Here she is directing a movie with Clara Bow, who was called the It Girl. And this was kind of a publicity shot where it's Clara Bow, the actress, who's standing behind the camera. But it does give you a chance to see the kind of cameras they used, like that picture we saw with Mary Pickford photographing Douglas Fairbanks doing a headstand. And Frances Marion was known for wearing masculine style clothes. And she did have a woman partner, and they went on to live together and had a long, long career working and living as partners. But at that time, that was a very remarkable thing to do, very courageous thing to do. And in her films, she wanted to focus on women's situations, all kinds of situations, which she did. And in the 70s, I was amazed to find that her films had such were so relevant to the feminist movement, because she focused on women doing what they wanted to do and having the guts to do it.
Yeah, I can think of there's a few films, Craig's Wife, which I really love, with Rosalind Russell, Dance Girl Dance, which is an incredible film with Maureen O'Hara and Lucille Ball. And she did one with Joan Crawford that was wonderful. She did really wonderful films, but later she went on to become a teacher of film. And I know that one of her students, several of her students became big directors, but one of them, of course, Francis Ford Coppola, who went on to make The Godfather, considered one of the greatest films of all time. And he has spoken about her being one of his great teachers.
There's a wonderful anecdote. I couldn't get over it. She taught at UCLA Film School in the later part of her life. And he was so poor, being a film student and trying to support himself. She would bring cookies to class, and sometimes those cookies would be his whole dinner. And at one point, he said in a very marvelous film about her that he was just about ready to give up. It's not worth it. And he was offered another kind of lower job rather than being a film producer and director. And she took him aside, and she thought he really had something. She was a marvelous teacher, and she was so passionate about film that she gave him the encouragement. He said that crumb of encouragement, which is a lovely pun, because this was over eating those cookies. That was his whole dinner. She said, I think you can do it. Just hang in there, which is what it. And
he did.
He did, and always gave her credit. He repeated the lessons he learned from her to his daughter, Sophia, who went on to become a director, because everything she taught him, he felt held fast. Those were the principles of fine workmanship, directing a film. And an aside that I didn't include in a book for young adults is that he also had a winery, as you may know, and he produced a bottle, I think a particular rum that he called the Dorothy Arzner rum.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's really special.
It's very special to have
another woman.
Yes. Oh, Margaret Booth was the first woman to be titled film editor. And she started when she was 17 years old. Again, remember that picture you showed of Lillian Gish and her sister with a gun coming through the wall in that first film they made? Well, that film was directed by D.W. Griffith, and the villain of the piece was Margaret Booth's brother. Wow. And he was an actor, and he died very tragically in a car crash in Los Angeles. And Griffith gave the eulogy at the graveside, and he offered Margaret a job when she finished high school to help support the family. And that's how Margaret got started. She went to work cutting film. I didn't know that. You see the strip of celluloid, they actually cut it with a scissors to get the story sequence in the right order and to eliminate duplicates. And that's how she learned her job, cutting it. I went into detail in the book, but it was just remarkable how she learned her craft.
And she continued on throughout her career, influencing other editors, but went on to win an Oscar late in her career as well, right?
An honorary Oscar
Honorary,
for her incredible contribution to film. And she's had a wonderful remark she made. Isn't it wonderful to do the work we love? Now, here is Claire West. Again, a first. The first woman, first designer, costume designer, to be called costume designer. I found out that when these actors would go to do a film, they just wore their own clothes, whatever they happened to be wearing that day. And the actor or actresses who wore better clothes often got the part because of the clothes. She was the first to actually design costumes and again worked for D.W. Griffith. He gave so many women their start. And here is her famous octopus gown. And it looks like an octopus. And she designed it so that it would represent the character of the woman in the film. In other words, she did her research. And often the person, the scenario writer, would base the storyline on some of the costuming that Claire West would do, her research. So this woman in this film is supposed to be a devilish woman who's terrible with men. And look how she has her arm clutched on that man's shoulder. And it's not going to be pretty.
I think she made costumes for a lot of the films of Gloria Swanson, who was one of the great actresses at that time period too.
That's right. And she was asked if actresses ever complained about her costume. She said never. They always loved the costume she designed. On the left, this was a Griffith film called Intolerance, and these were Babylonian costumes. And the movie magazine, it sparked a trend, just as movies do now. Her costumes sparked a trend. So in the movie magazine, they said, "Back to Babylon." And women wanted to wear not exactly this costume, but something like it, like Roman sandals. So even in those days, there she is on the right with Cecil B. DeMille, the director, and an actress modeling the very costume she had designed. You see, he's holding up the sketch that she had prepared. And she was the first to really do research for things like Babylon. She had a co-worker go to Egypt to come up with design ideas. Research was terribly important. So she established a way of working in that field that was carried on.
And her impact goes all the way 100 years later to today, and with a woman who was decided to help you and write a wonderful prologue to your book, and that is
Ruth E. Carter. I'm so moved because my assistant is her friend, and I first spoke to her on the phone while I was making a salad for lunch, and we asked her if she would write the foreword for this book, and she was wonderful because she's at the time was working on Black Panther, and she won an Oscar not only for Black Panther, but for the next movie, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Mm-hmm. And this was marvelous, but she wrote a beautiful foreword in continuing the ideas of the very first costume designer, talking about research and really paying attention. I mean, her research for Black Panther is incredible. So I felt very honored and fortunate that she would take the time to do this for the book. And it really brought it up to date,
And you can see, just like with Claire West, the research that she put into the costumes from clothing styles through different African cultures, but also through Mayan and indigenous cultures in the second film, that she did. And her work is showcased quite a bit at the Academy Museum. But again, there's that through line, right? From Claire West all the way
Just
through.
amazing, amazing. And also the determination to do it, daring to dream, daring to do the work. Because here, Ruth Carter was facing all kinds of obstacles, racism and being a woman. Things changed from the time of the early films to present day, where women are just now fighting and struggling to get back their power in filmmaking and have their voices heard and seen.
And we finish with another incredible woman who, from Silence, who impacted so much, and that is Helen Holmes.
Helen Holmes. Oh, I loved writing about Helen Holmes. She was a stunt woman. This was so important during the women's movement. Women still didn't have the right to vote. And when she started making films around 1917, 18, women were struggling for the right to vote. And she loved driving cars. And she was a daredevil. And she participated in the women's movement to get the right to vote by driving cars and showing what a woman could do, anything a man could do. So in her serials, rather than The Perils of Pauline, where Pauline had to be rescued, Helen Holmes, as you can see, rescued the men. this poor guy is the weak one who's tied to the railroad track, and Helen's coming along to rescue him. And she did all her own stunts. It was amazing. And there was no rehearsal. There were no safety nets. She said, let's see if it works. And here she is hanging from a trestle. It's extraordinary how you found this film clip, Bren.
Well, there are some wonderful film clips of Helen Holmes. If you search for Helen Holmes actress, some wonderful bits of her silence do come up, and they're amazing. I'm going to sort of play this and then clip into a part of it. Oops, let me go back real quick, and let me play this real quick. Yes, here we go. This is a good part. And we see these men desperate to jump on the train tracks. But of course, Helen Holmes sees that.
Oh, they've stolen her money.
They've stolen
the railroad money. Yep.
She's bringing them to justice. Now, this is her doing all these stunts, right?
That's Helen. I'm gasping. Oh, golly.
She's doing Tom Cruise stuff here, her own stunts.
No doubles. She's it.
And you can see that train coming underneath the trestle.
Oh, well, the timing of this. Wow.
I'm going to skip up just for a second to another part where you actually see her fighting with one of the men.
Right.
And we're going to see her fall off into the water.
Oh.
And those are all her doing all of those amazing stunts. Wow, 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 wow.
And you might have noticed the title, it's KLM Films. That was her own company. She and her husband owned that company. So not only did she do the stunts and perform in them, she wrote the script. She wanted thrilling action, and she produced the films. Amazing.
And I'm going to remove that from the stage. Wow, that was a really fun journey through your amazing book. And there's so much more information inside the book about these women's incredible lives. Did you have fun researching all this?
Oh, golly, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good, because my face doesn't seem to be moving in the but I loved researching. One of the best parts of the research, of course, was watching these movies, finding clips of them, and I get so caught up in watching them. It was incredible. And then I had to go back and actually write the book. But I loved it, and I loved discovering people women I hadn't even known about, and seeing what they had accomplished. Just marvelous, very inspirational for me. And I love movies. I love them even more, knowing what these women did to make it all happen.
And for all the young people who are out there now in their classrooms, and what's great about Los Angeles, we have some amazing schools where they're magnet schools, where they're learning the skills of many of these women and men who created the industry. They're learning editing, they're learning directing, they're learning production aspects of it, both on and off the screen. What do you hope that they can take from a book like this about these people's lives?
Oh, I hope if any kids out there like me want to work in the arts, and now you know a little bit more about all the different parts of filmmaking, not just acting, but writing, directing, editing, costume design, and you see what current women like Ruth Carter are doing, but you see what the early women did. It's possible. It's really possible. It just takes work and determination and not giving up. I really believe in that, and I come across that theme over and over again. It's what I feel for myself. It can be done. It can happen. You just have to want to do it very badly and learn how.
Well, thank you, Susan. This has been an incredibly wonderful time spent with you about your book. And I really thank you for sharing all of this history with us.
Brent, thank you. And thank you for making it so entertaining and showing me parts of movies that I hadn't seen before. Thank you.
Absolutely. I hope you all explore a little bit more and get to see some of these amazing women on the big screen or the little phone, wherever you may actually see it. That will be really special. And we hope you have a really great day, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.